One man signed more than 3,700 of them. In 12 years, he used a power the Constitution never names to reshape the country, close every bank in America, and send citizens into camps. The number is real. The story behind it is darker than the tally suggests. The Constitution does not say the words executive order. It does not have to. Article 2 gives the president the duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. From that single phrase grew a tool that would one day be used more in 2 years than some presidents used in 8. But at the start there was only a letter. June 8, 1789. George Washington had been president for barely 2 months. He sent a request to the heads of the first executive departments. Give me a full, precise, and distinct idea of the affairs of the United States under your care. That directive is counted as the first executive order. No fanfare, no crisis, just a demand for information. He was not inventing a new power. He was acting on the same authority that would one day be used to reshape the entire economy. The framers had left the boundaries vague. They had given the president the duty to execute the laws. They had not listed what he could or could not command by pen alone. Nobody then could have imagined that the same kind of presidential instruction would, 144 years later, shut down every bank in the nation in a single stroke. For decades, the power was used sparingly. The first 25 presidents over more than a century signed about 1,262 executive orders combined, fewer than 12 per year on average. The tool existed. It had not yet been unleashed. Then one presidency changed everything. What happened next would redefine the limits of the office itself. The story does not start in the Oval Office. It starts in the streets, in the queues outside failing banks, in the fear that would push a nation to accept a level of executive action it had never seen before. Late February 1933, the banking system was in free fall. Thousands of institutions had already failed. Governors were closing state banks one after another. By the time Roosevelt raised his hand to take the oath, the country was waiting for a single voice to say what would happen next. The run on the banks had become a national panic. There was no federal deposit insurance, no guarantee that the money would be there when the doors opened again. Roosevelt had promised action. He would deliver it in a form the country had never seen, not one order but hundreds, then thousands orders that would set a standard no president had ever approached, and that would leave a legacy far more complicated than a number. Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the oath of office on March 4, 1933. The economy was in collapse. Banks were failing by the hundreds. Depositors were rushing to withdraw their money before the doors closed for good. Within 48 hours, he had declared a national bank holiday. Every bank in the United States closed. No withdrawals, no deposits. The country held its breath. Then came the orders to reopen them, to reorganize them, to put the federal government at the center of the recovery. Executive Order 6073, March 10, 1933. The banks that were sound would reopen. The rest would be restructured or closed. It was only the beginning. Congress would pass the Emergency Banking Act in a single day, in a special session that would become known as the 100 Days. But the White House did not wait. Roosevelt had already moved. The orders were already flowing. Speed was the point. The country needed to see that someone was in charge. In 1933 and 1934 alone, Roosevelt signed over 1,000 executive orders. New Deal agencies, relief programs, land conservation, civil service rules, and reorganizations flowed from his desk. The pace did not slow. Year after year, the pen kept moving. By the time he died in office in April 1945, he had signed 3,721 executive orders. No other president comes close. The number is so large that it distorts the scale of everything that came before and everything that came after. One presidency, 12 years, more orders than most of his predecessors had signed in a lifetime. And the weight of that number would only become clear when one of those orders was used not to save the economy, but to remove citizens from their homes. Harry Truman, who followed him, signed 896 in 8 years. Modern presidents typically sign between 1 and 200 per term. Roosevelt averaged over 300 per year for 12 years. The scale was without precedent. And it was not only volume. Some of those orders carried a moral weight that still shadows American history. The same tool that had saved the banks would soon be used in a way that historians would spend decades condemning. February 19, 1942. 2 months after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. It authorized the Secretary of War and military commanders to prescribe military areas from which any persons could be excluded. The order did not name a single group. It spoke in the cold language of military areas and exclusion. In practice, it was used to remove roughly 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Men, women, and children, citizens and non-citizens alike. The order had been pushed for by politicians and lobbyists who had long wanted Japanese Americans gone from the region. Pearl Harbor had given them the moment they needed. They were forced into internment camps. They lost homes, businesses, and years of their lives. Families were broken apart. Property was sold at a fraction of its value. They lived for 3 years behind barbed wire, under suspicion, without trial. When the war ended, they were released. No apology. No compensation. Not then. It would take decades for the government to formally acknowledge the wrong. The damage to families and communities would last generations. Historians have widely condemned the policy as a grave injustice and a period of national shame. It was one signature among thousands. That is what executive power unchecked by restraint can do. Roosevelt believed he was protecting the nation. The cost was borne by citizens who had committed no crime. The same instrument that had stabilized banks and built the New Deal had been used to uproot families. The tension between speed and oversight, between crisis and rights, has never gone away. At the time, no one could have known how deeply that single order would scar the nation. After Roosevelt, Congress and the courts took a harder look at how far executive orders could go. The number of orders per president generally fell. Since the Eisenhower era, most presidents have signed between 1 and 200 per term. The age of the 1,000-order presidency was over, but the tool remained. No one had taken it away. No one could. It was still rooted in Article 2. It was still waiting for the next crisis, the next president willing to use it at full force. Every president since Washington has issued executive orders except one, William Henry Harrison, who died just a month after his inauguration. The power is still there. How often and how boldly each president chooses to use it would shape the rest of the century. The record would be broken only by the scale of the crises that followed and by the ambition of the men who held the pen. No one has yet matched it. No one may ever need to. The number stands as a reminder of what one presidency can do when crisis, time, and power align. The rest is history, and the number still stands. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how one president rewrote the rules of executive power, like this video and subscribe for more weekly history breakdowns. Today, the record still stands. 3,721. No successor has approached it. In the 21st century, the highest count belongs to a president who signed 301 across 2 terms, 15th on the all-time list. But first among modern presidents, the gap between first and 15th is the gap between a nation in depression and war and a nation in peacetime. Roosevelt faced emergencies that demanded fast, repeated action. He also had 12 years, 4 terms, a length no future president would ever hold. Time and crisis together produced a number that may never be matched. But that was not the end of the story. What happened next would shape how every president after him would be measured. What endures is not the count itself, but the lesson. The same power that can reopen banks can also close borders around innocent people. The same pen that created the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration also signed the order that sent families to camps. That duality is not an accident. It is the nature of unchecked authority. It can build, it can destroy. It depends entirely on who holds it and when they choose to act. Executive orders are not neutral. They are as moral or as flawed as the hands that sign them. The Constitution gave the president a duty. It did not set a limit. That limit has been tested and will be again. If this look at presidential power and its consequences resonated with you, like the video and subscribe for more documentaries that go beyond the numbers. The first order was a request for reports. The 3,721st was signed by a man who had already transformed the country. Between them lies the story of how one phrase in the Constitution became the most used, and sometimes the most dangerous tool in the Oval Office. The numbering of executive orders did not even begin until 1907. Before that, many were never formally counted. The Federal Register Act of 1936 would later require that executive orders be published. Roosevelt was already 3 years into his presidency by then. He had already signed more than 1,000. So the true scale of what Roosevelt did may never be fully measured. What we know is this: he holds the record. He will likely hold it forever. Not because no one has tried to match his ambition, but because no one has had the same combination of crisis, time, and willingness to act without waiting for permission. The first president set the precedent with a letter. The 32nd president turned that precedent into a machine. And the rest of the country learned too late that the machine could do more than anyone had planned for. The record holder is not a footnote, he is a warning and a mirror. Every president since has had to decide how much to use that same power. Some have pulled back. Some have pulled back. The tally shifts, but the precedent does not. The answer was written in ink again and again until the number itself became history. In the end, it's not just about who signed the most, It's about the power they left behind for the next.